so we're just about at 7 o'clock, so I think I'll say that it's time to begin this evening. So welcome everyone, I'm Sarah Cox, I'm the Exhibitions Manager for the South West Heritage Trust, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's event, which we're hosting at the Somerset Rural Life Museum. I'm pleased to see lots of you in the room. We've also got some people joining us online as well, so welcome to those also. And this evening's talk will be an in-conversation that's connected to our current exhibition, Parallels, which features drawing and sculpture by Simon Hitchens, who we'll be hearing from this evening. And I'm sure it will be a wide-ranging and inspiring conversation. And I'll just introduce our two speakers for this evening. So as I said, Simon is a Somerset-based sculptor that we've been working with on the exhibition, and he is joined by Ben Tufnell, who has come from London, and he's a curator, a writer, an editor, and director of Paraffin Gallery. So we're delighted to have him here this evening. Just a few words about the format of the event. So they'll be speaking for around about 40 minutes or so, and then there'll be space for questions at the end. So please do keep those in mind, and we'll allow space to feed those in, both from you here and those joining us through Zoom. So so please do keep those in mind. This evening event is being co-hosted by CLOSE Gallery, who have been close collaborators on the exhibition. So just a word of thanks to them as well. But without further ado, I will hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming this evening, and thank you to Sarah, FREENY and Simon for the invitation to be part of this. It's a real honour to be in conversation.
Well, that's kind of you, Ben. I'll definitely return that, and thank you for being the other half of the conversation.
So we're here to talk about this extraordinary project that is on display here at the museum, which for me I think is really a body of work about time and place. Time, the association, the ideas about time are made quite explicit in the display, with the sculptures almost arranged as a clock face. And you've talked about the way the work addresses celestial time, geological time, and human time. And we can unpack that perhaps as we progress. And place, in that it's about specific locations, but also those locations at specific moments in time. And taken together, the drawings and sculptures constitute a journey across the British Isles that unfolds not only in the 21st century, but across many millions of years. So it's a very ambitious project in terms of its conceptual scope. And so I wondered if we could begin with the beginning. What were the starting points for this project? How did you begin to conceptualize it in all its complexity?
I always find that quite a hard question to answer, because what is the genesis of any idea? To be honest, I guess it was born out of a body of drawings I was making for quite a few years before this body of drawings, where I was drawing shadows of stones from electrical light above the stone in my studio. And I started to play around with outlines, silhouettes of those rocks in my studio. I found some sort of tool on the website that could predict where the sun was or would be. And I made one at any point in the future. In fact, I've never pushed it. I don't know how far in the future, but certainly handfuls of years, enough for my lifetime. I guess technically they could probably forecast thousands of years with reasonable accuracy. I imagine. I don't see any reason why not, with astronomy and modern mathematics. So I started to work out how to make drawings using electrical light in the nighttime in my studio, where I was literally drawing the future, because I could place lights at certain times of the day, at certain times of the year, angled lights, spotlights in my studio, and then draw these shadows of this particular rock, which happened to be a very humble piece of Earth's material I found outside my studio in Somerset. And I guess from that one, I remember doing a post actually, an Instagram post, and I kind of like doing Instagram posts because they allow me a way of understanding possibly more clearly what I'm doing, because I have to share it with the world through text. And I had an enormous response to that one. It was a kind of cool image, but I think what I wrote about the possibility of, well, the actuality of drawing the future, I imagine that's what grafts people's imagination, because the response was immense.
Well, it's a pretty extraordinary notion.
It is bold, but actually also very simple.
Yeah.
And I guess through that, I then started to actually draw real sunlight, not electrical light, studio light. I've made the first durational day drawing of a stone found in a field right by my table, which I set up in February of 2019. That was the very first drawing I made. So I rocked up in this field with a load of kit. It's not the sort of efficient kit you now see here in the film. It was all cobbled together just to work out the process. And I made a drawing. As the sun rose in the east, it cast a westerly shadow of this stone that I found literally down there as I walked into this spot in the field. And I drew around that shadow, and I continued drawing until effectively it went over the western horizon. I think that was pretty much a blue sky day, that one. So continual drawing, relentless drawing, no spaces in my time between drawn lines. And then I did a whole number of sort of drawings over the summer, getting very excited around.
So how did it feel to be outside and not in the studio?
Oh, delicious! Because I mean, I don't live for the outdoors, but I like being outside. Always have. I like working outside. Particularly, I've done many years of carving stone outside. I haven't carved stone for 20 years, but I used to carve it outside. It's partly practical because you can get the dust carried away. But there's something about being in the elements. I climb a lot. I just love being outside, particularly with wind in my hair. But the privilege of seeing the sun rise and set in one calendar day, I mean, it's easy. We can all do it. We can do it tomorrow. But it's quite profound, actually.
Yeah.
So
you knew pretty much straight away that you found something that was
it resonated with me big time.
Yeah.
That was important, and it had kind of brought together my engagement with landscape conceptually with my work over the years. It had become tighter and tighter, or more focused, conceptually focused. But this was a real marrying between sort of concept and action in a beautifully empty way. It's just a man drawing in a field. That's it. But it had such sort of resonance, to me at least. So to answer your question, quite quickly I then started to work with this notion of time. And I've always had a fascination with rock for all sorts of reasons for decades. And I wanted to explore the geological time of the British Isles, which have a really rich and varied history of geology. You know, some of the very oldest rocks on our planet are in the British Isles, going back 3 billion years. The Earth's only 4.56 billion years. It's a phenomenal age to some of the youngest. So I devised this sort of journey, this odyssey, if you like, of taking the notion of doing durational day drawings of different rocks on different lines of parallel. And as I thought about it, different lines of parallels across the British Isles. And as I thought about it more, it just seemed to unfold. I mean, it took quite a few weeks to sort of gestate in my mind, but every time I thought about it, it just, something else sort of zippered open. It's like, oh my golly, you know, this adds to the theme, and that adds to the theme, and if I do it like this, oh wow, that's extraordinary sort of resonances here. So it was just, and then I was hooked. I just had to then plan out.
So you've got kind of multiple systems of organisation. You've got these different kind of rock types that give us a geological kind of history, but then you've also got this man-made artificial system of mapping and, you know, the latitude, lines of latitude, and they're sort of interconnecting like this in some way, aren't they?
Yes. I spent many weeks in the studio working out where these sites physically were on the British Isles. So I chose, because there are 11 lines of latitude that run through the British Isles, I wanted to find stones from 11 different geological time periods, one on each of the different lines of latitude. And it was fine. The first sort of 5 or 6 lines of latitude, I just looked at the geology map and thought, okay, right, I've crossed off the Cambrian or the Devonian or the Silurian time periods. And then I thought, oh my golly, this next line of latitude, I'm doubling up on the Cambrian again, or I've done Jurassic twice, so I have to go back to where I was. It was kind of a rejigging of trying to sort of find a different geological time period on each of the different lines of latitude. And what was really, and here's the interesting thing, I think, is that because I need to see the rising sun unobscured by distant hill or tree or house or building or something, I needed to find a slightly elevated location on that line of latitude where that stone, that rock formation was. And sometimes on the British Isles, I mean, I can't remember which one, but there's quite a few actually. I think Skerpenbeck in Yorkshire, which is latitude 54, there was kind of like 20 yards in the whole British Isles I could make this drawing. And actually a road happened to run through most of it. It was a little by road. Sometimes I'm on the top of a hill. It takes me a long time to walk the top of a hill. This was a fortunate one. I could park up in the verge, get set up, but the specificity of the need to fit into the entire sort of concept of what I was doing across the British Isles geologically meant that very drawing had a totally tight physical topographical
so
space.
your kind of ground conceptual structure almost kind of falls apart at that moment if you can't find the site that kind of delivers all the characteristics that you need, stones that you can pick up and move around, and as you say, this kind of possibility of witnessing the entire arc of the day, the solar day.
Yes. Well, I did say it took me weeks and weeks planning with paper OS maps. I do like OS maps. Geological maps as well, paper ones, because then you can draw on them. I can draw on them and make notes, and I take those into the field, and I knew where I need to park up the car at night to be able to sort of sleep, so I can then have a sort of long walk in, or try and find the stone in this area, and is the drawing space right next to it, or is it sort of half a mile down the road on the same line of latitude, still on the same geological sort of time zone. So working with maps, but also Street View a lot as well, Google Street View, because that enabled me in advance to literally scope out horizons for rising and setting suns.
That was going to be my next question. How did you avoid driving all the way up to Yorkshire only to find that someone 2 months ago built a wall?
Careful preparation beforehand. Well, I mean, sometimes you can suss it out on an OS map. You know, if I'm on the top of a hill and the nearest hill of an equal height, maybe 7 miles away or further, that's not an issue. You know, I am going to see the rising sun when the calculations say rises at 6:53 a.m. Oh yeah, 6:53. Hello, sun. Got a few minutes until it's strong enough to cast a shadow, and I can get on with drawing. So OS maps gave me most of the topographical information I needed, but definitely, I definitely worked a lot with.
But actually, making the work was a one-shot thing. You turn up, you make the work, and you know. So the advanced planning, having done all this research to actually select the sites, there's then this question of how do you ensure the maximum possibility of being able to make a drawing on the day that you have selected?
Well, the day I was selected had slightly chance. I consciously decided to make the drawings over the autumn equinox. One, because I came up with this idea over the summer, and I particularly wanted to have the drawn lines on the piece of paper effectively running like a big brush stroke across left to right. And as the paper is always orientated north on my flat table, if the sun rises in the east casting a westerly shadow, it just runs and then flips overhead, sets in the west casting an easterly shadow. You just get this sort of horizontal band of drawn line. So I've now forgotten your question, actually.
Well, just thinking about the level of organisational planning that on the day or in the days leading up to the day, you've chosen your site. You haven't actually been to that site, so you're going to turn up and make a drawing?
Well, I'm pretty confident about the site because I've done my prior
Yeah.
research with maps.
Yeah.
Pretty confident, actually. Not confident about finding a stone of the kind of roughly the same size that the noon shadow would fit into this 50
Yeah.
centimeter depth of paper. So all the stones had to be about this sort of size, and a stone that wouldn't wobble and fall over. Sometimes it took like ages to find the right
Yeah.
stone. Just finding
Yeah.
the unmodified. So I am taking a piece of planet Earth and placing it on the table.
So you wouldn't prop it in some way?
Never.
It has to be...
No, that's my own. You'll never know whether I'm telling the truth. But I didn't, because there's a real sort of analog sort of binary system
Yeah.
I'm engaging with here, which is it's my own sort of sense of it's my system that I set up, and that's why it's so powerfully sort of meaningful to me, at least. But the maps enabled me to find the locations. But once I'd started on the journey, and I knew it's going to take me, well, there's 11 lines of latitude, at least 11 days, probably a bit more because there's lots of driving in between, and there might be a bad weather day. So I was prepared to go as long as it took, actually.
Yeah.
And in the end, it took about 3.5 weeks, I think. I was on the road from latitude 50 in Cornwall up to 60 in Shetland. And the first, right the way, so latitude 50 up to 51, 55 in first one in Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway, the weather was just fantastic, and I just had to sort of max out and just finish my day's drawing, get in the car, drive for the next site 2 hours, find a stone, get my head down, actually make the sarnies, sandwiches for the next day, get everything prepared for the next day, new sheet of paper, refresh the water bottles, all that sort of stuff, sleep, get up, alarm goes off, and I had to do that on the back of the day's drawing, because I couldn't miss the chance of this fantastic weather day. And the weather sort of changed around, it was at latitude 55, this massive bank of cloud came in the last hour of the day. Actually, you don't see drawn shadows, you won't notice it, but unless I point it out, but there's not perfect symmetry in that particular drawing, bank end on latitude 55, because the sun was occluded by this huge bank of cloud, high weather system, slowly moving in. It's threatening all day. I'm thinking, please stay off until the sunset. But I lost the last hour. But after that, then I was down to the chance of the weather. And on one situation, in fact, the next drawing should have been latitude 56. I actually skipped a latitude, went to 57, and then came back to 56.
I can't believe it, Simon.
Because the weather was better.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll let you off that one.
Well, it makes no difference to the sort of concept. In terms of, I didn't need to sort of draw them chronologically.
No,
I don't believe so.
Okay, so let's talk about actually making those drawings, because they are absolutely extraordinary objects and images. And as we were discussing earlier, when you first look at them, some of them, in particular the ones made on very bright sunlit days where the lines are there all the way through, they almost look like computer plotted sort of visualizations or something like that. But of course they're not, they're all hand
Good luck,
drawn.
yeah.
So this is quite a kind of durational endurance challenge that you're undertaking. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the physical demands of making these works, but also what your state of mind is when you're in the drawing.
Yeah, the physical side is kind of fairly straightforward in some way. I just need to be prepared. I mean, really prepared.
Yeah.
Definitely the whole of it. I mean, taking this project aside and doing a one-off drawing, I always get pretty nervous sort of running up to the drawing the whole day before. I'm prepping materials, kit, clothing for all sorts of weather circumstances, definitely my food, my fuel, totally important, everything. Yeah. Drawing kit, I did a drawing this year, it was the first one where my pen actually stopped working, and it's like, I was 2 hours in, it's like, oh my God, why did it stop, that was it. Even my spare pen didn't work.
Pens.
Stock of new nibs, I've learned now. Yeah. So get everything prepared. So that's the most important thing, is to be prepared. I don't mind waking up early, but I always try and sort of leave it to the late thing as possible in terms of setting the alarm, because it's on Midsummer's Day, it's like I had to get up at 3:30, I think, or the alarm goes off at 3:30. Yeah. So, and these ones in this exhibition, they're all roughly around 7 a.m. ballpark, sunrise. So it takes me half an hour to set up the table and my kit, having arrived on the site. And then it takes me roughly half an hour to walk to the site. So that's a whole hour before, so what's that, 6 o'clock. Then I need to sort of wake up before that and get dressed and have some breakfast and get my rucksack on. And so at minimum, I need to wake up an hour and a half before the sun rises, minimum. Yeah. But once the sun has come up and I am prepared, I get slightly nervous actually that I'm going to stumble over. I've messed up my timings and I'm going to see the sun rise and I'm not quite ready for it because I haven't constructed the table. And that would totally blow it for me. Yeah. Because it's just this sort of integrity thing of just being, just sort of observing the day really and being, I'm just the tool that kind of records what happens. And if I miss the first few minutes or the possibility of first few minutes of drawing, it's not game over, but it's like, it's not going to sit well with me. Yeah. So I have to be prepared completely before my calculations say the sun rises, and I generally am about 5 minutes. So once the dawn has broken and the sun is strong enough to draw, and I'm actually drawing, it's relaxing. You're off. So in terms of the physical endurance, I don't find it that. I mean, it can be hard. I'll tell you a few stories actually, but I've designed the table to be at the right sort of height, so I've never got
you're not sitting, are you? So,
never, no.
So are you kind of moving around the drawing all the time?
Yeah, in order to do one drawn line shadow, which takes about maybe 2.5 minutes, I'm moving around the table, probably about 180 degrees. In the middle of the day, when the sun is quite high, I'm actually drawing from about 3/4 to 4/5 all of around that table. I'm basically going around that table hundreds of times, and I wear out the grass beneath. We can talk about later actually about the absence of what gets left behind there. But once the drawing does start, once I start drawing, because the table is the right height, my pressure's off. The kind of task has been achieved. I just need to not mess up, and I need to keep myself fueled. So the physical endurance, I mean, sometimes it can get tough if I get tired. I have had a few very tired days. Maybe I'm not fully slept for the previous few days, and tiredness sort of hits me. Sometimes it can hit me late morning. It always hits me sort of after midday. That's a big marker. It's like, okay, it's now on the backward slope of time. Somewhere between 2 and 4 is a horrible section of time because it's just going on forever and it's still, sun's really high and I've got hours to the sunsets. And it's not getting boring, but it's just getting mentally testing. So I can get a bit tired at that time of day. But there was one time on the second drawing, latitude 51, which was Cranbourne Chase, not so far from here. That was a mega tough. That was probably one of the toughest days actually, because it was one of those sort of sultry September days. There was not a breath of wind. I could hear bees sort of fuzzing around, flies, some distance. I was up on the Cranbourne Chase on the northern slopes, so I can see sort of distance the nearest urban settlement, little hamlet, was called Bowerchalk. I could hear some sort of tractor in the field. I couldn't hear anyone else, couldn't hear any cars, the odd birds sort of chattering. It was just such an oppressively still day, and it was mentally really intense. Yeah. And I didn't go nuts, but I was. It was mentally very challenging actually. Yeah. I had to really focus on just making this drawing happen. Technically it was fine and I could eat fueled, but it was just mentally I just wanted to stop. I wanted someone to sort of knock me out. I wanted a cloud to come over for like an hour. That would have been glorious. Yeah. And I could just stop and do, but it was relentless. It was a blue sky day, you see. So that meant I was relentlessly drawing
couldn't stop.
I don't stop. I finish and I go back to the beginning and start.
And does that I mean that sounds like an ordeal that you're putting yourself through, and does that add anything to the work for you? I mean, certainly for me, I'm kind of in awe of that level of commitment that you're making to the work.
I don't think it adds anything to the work.
No?
I think it adds something to my experience of having made that work. Yeah. What it was for me, which is more than half the reason I get up and go and do these things anyway. Mm. I make them because they make me feel good, and they root me in the world and in time, and they kind of give purpose to my life somehow. It makes sense. I don't know, life's confusing, isn't it? I find life pretty confusing. There's all sorts of...
It's very confusing.
But you do one of these drawings, you'll be sorted.
So do you sometimes achieve a state of mental clarity when you're making these works?
Intense calmness, I suppose in some ways it is quite meditative, because there's one simple task, I have to focus, otherwise I make a mistake, and I never have. And because I'm focusing and concentrating, and obviously thoughts come in, but like when you're meditating, you want to sort of like say, hello thought, and then just sort of gently sort of encourage it out of your head and just be sort of open to the moment. And the moment is full of birdsong, actually, or buzzing flies on latitude 51. There was a lot of sort of buzzing flies and not enough birdsong to keep me awake. It was a tough one. Or indeed wind, you know, there's a lot of sort of sound of wind.
And having made the drawing, how do you judge if it's successful or not?
Yeah,
or having made the drawing, is it of its nature successful because you've completed the task that you set yourself?
That's a good question.
I was wondering what would happen if you set up and started and then the clouds came in and you essentially were left with a blank piece of paper at the end of the day. Would that be a successful drawing?
I think so. I have yet to make and exhibit a day's drawing which has no human marks on it.
Because you plan carefully to avoid that.
Well, I do aim to go out and get some sunshine to cause a shadow for me to trace the outline, the silhouette of that drawing. But what's interesting, I first started out trying to make drawings, choosing days which were blue sky days.
Yeah.
And I think in actual fact, possibly what makes some of the most interesting drawings are the times when it's not blue sky day and a cloud does occlude the shadow.
Yes, yeah.
And there was one very memorable day in latitude 53 in Lincolnshire, piece of Jurassic stone. Again, I could see this band of cloud, this big bank of cloud coming in, and it was threatening. Again, very high, moving very slowly, and it hit me about 2 p.m. So I got my midday shadow line, which was really important for my sort of whole process. I needed to try and record the midday shadow on each of those 11 lines of latitude. And fortunately I did. That was mere good fortune. I could not have planned that. I was so fortunate. But this bank of cloud came in at 2 o'clock-ish, and it was gone. But my task is to stay there, rooted to the spot, in case the sun casts a shadow of the stone. It's like, no chance, there's cloud cover.
Yeah.
But every now and again, I could see this sort of tiny little hole in the cloud cover, and you see this sort of, almost like a filmic beam of light hitting the field. I was in a large stubble field, so it was a big flat plain. I could see these pools of light sort of moving across, quite slowly, across the field. It's like, darn it, it's only like 100 yards over that way, 300, come to me, And occasionally, they did hit me. So that drawing is very intense
tiny little bit of...
in the morning, and then, yes, as you say, just 5, 10, 20 seconds at the very most. And it gave me 5 or 6 little drawn lines in the entire right-hand side, the afternoon of that drawing. That was a magical drawing because... So there's... I mean, that's totally successful. I mean, on one level, success is, okay, well done, mate. You've done it. You've got through the day. You've completed your self-imposed task. That's the job. And then what makes a good drawing? I don't know, maybe that's for you to discern. I mean, I hang them up in my studio and look at them for months and then just enjoy them.
Yeah, I mean, they're extraordinarily beautiful things, and it is very difficult to say this one is more beautiful than that one. They all have very different qualities, very different characters. The blue sky drawings have this extraordinary kind of sense of almost like sort of force fields or something, whereas those cloudy days where it becomes more fragmented, perhaps certainly I sort of see the suggestion of petals and natural forms unfolding or something. So I imagine we will all bring a different set of associations and values to those, and there'll be some people that prefer the blue sky days, and there's some who prefer, and that's fine. So moving on to the sculptures. So you've made the drawings out in the field, so to speak, but the sculptures are studio works.
Yes.
And they are made from the rocks, but they're using the drawings to map the physical projection of the shadow. Can you explain how this process works? Because I'm still slightly...
Well done, you've got it. I can see you've got it, but it is kind of hard. So there's one line I drew on each of those drawings, which happens to be the noon line, which is, it changes, but it's roughly between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. depending on where you are in the calendar year. On the equinox, it is always roughly between 1:05 and 13 minutes past 1. It's never 12 o'clock. It's noon, halfway between sunrise and sunset.
So that's the moment the sun is highest.
That's the moment the sun at its highest,
yeah.
And due south.
Yeah.
So it's at its zenith. I make a pencil mark on that line, which I'm doing with my black rotoring pen. So I've got a recording of that particular line, which one of these 300 lines is like, oh, yeah, that's the very accurate noonday line. I've also registered the stone itself with lines drawn on the stone, and again pencil lines of those stone drawn lines on the paper, so that I can come back to the studio and I put the stone, which I always take away with me from the site, and they're all down in my studio. I can place the stone back in exactly the right position, as it was in the drawing, and it's registered to that drawing.
So this is you actually making the drawing, but if we imagine you in the studio, you would then put the stone on the paper and trace that noon line.
Yes, I can make a tracing of the noon shadow line.
Yeah.
I then through a series of about 7 different positive, negative mold making processes of casting the back shaded side of the stone, the shadow face, and assisting that with the very accurately located outline of the shadow line. I basically sort of build up the planes of the shadow itself, filling in between this negative void, the space, which is just ambient space in reality, making it three-dimensional. Yeah. But all of this is processes, quite slow processes in the studio.
It's clearly a very complex process, and one thing I wanted to ask you about in the conversation was the difference between carving and casting, because we're talking about presence and absence, and with casting you are dealing with both presence and absence in a way that you don't with carving, I think.
Well, you've got the presence of a stone, haven't you? And if you reduce that stone by reducing it, which is what the act of carving is, you are making something absent. Yeah. Henry Moore put holes in, or Barbara Hepworth, that is an absence within the present. Yeah, you could argue. That's one way of looking at it. Yeah. I did used to carve stone, reduce its form. I think by nature, some sculptors think they're more like sort of model makers, builders, and others are more sort of reductive in their way of sort of thinking about things. I probably am more reductive, although I always love the act of building. Love building with timber and things, but not to make artworks, just constructing things. I do like constructing, but I think I probably see the world more in that sort of what can be taken away, or what has been taken away, or what could be taken away. So a reductive sense. Yeah. So the process of making these sculptures is playing with, it's making real this negative space. I like it. It's also because they're about time. It's a moment in time, a very briefest moment. The sun at its zenith, casting a shadow, bang, off this stone. That's time, the 4th dimension. Yeah. So my sculptures are 3-dimensional. So I'm sort of making the 4th dimension 3-dimensional, which is it's quite a nice sort of.
And we were talking earlier about the sculptural representation of shadows, and racking our brains and trying to think of any other artist who has sculpted shadow, and
we failed, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, which is quite I think it's a really extraordinary notion to kind of You're rendering the absence of light as a solid thing, which seems like a sort of quite a magical notion to me.
Well, yeah, it's kind of, to me it seems quite sort of normal, I suppose, because...
But that's because you're an artist.
Well, yes, but I've also been playing around. I mean, I made a seminal work called In the Presence of Absence back in 2004, and that was dealing with presence and absence and the materiality of space that was not there, and that just set the whole motion running. And I can see the lineality of my conceptual approach to making work right the way through to these drawings and indeed the sculptures. It's all about absence and
yeah, but absence rendered in iron, and you kindly allowed me to pick one of those sculptures up earlier, and it was much heavier and denser than I anticipated. But clearly, the decision to use iron is an important one. Not bronze. Why iron?
Oh, because it's of the earth. Because there's a resonance there. There's a this damn phrase, "truth of materials," it sort of rattles around sculptor's head. Was it Henry Moore who first said it? I don't know. I'm not a massive fan of Henry Moore. I'm not a bad fan either. But I mean, truth of materials is kind of part of my sort of a history in a way. So I think the materiality of objects which I make as sculptures is really important. I think it adds to something, the choice of the materials. I could have made out of polystyrene or plasticine or crushed Coke cans, but I chose to make it out of cast iron, particularly because it's of the earth, iron. There's something that seems to resonate with the fact that these are shadows of stones which are of the earth, and in fact lots of them with red colours in them. The red colour is iron. I've never really been drawn to bronze as a medium because it's man-made. And I just find it slightly insincere as a material, being an alloy. There's nothing more sincere than a piece of iron. I mean, okay, we have to smelt it out of the rock through various processes, but the mineral there, it's in the earth. It's from the earth directly.
Okay, perhaps that leads us on to the 12th site and the 12th object. It's not a rock. The object that represents the Anthropocene. Can you tell us how you selected the site for the 12th drawing and how you selected the non-rock for the 12th drawing? So
the number 12 is important, that there is a 12th drawing, given that there's only 11 lines of latitude that cross the British Isles. Because the whole project is to do with time and transience, 12 is just, it kind of riffs through time and society and history and religion across humanity forever. The number 12, thinking about 12 months of the year, thinking about 12 hours of daylight over the equinox. So 12 lines of latitude, well, there aren't one, but there are 12 geological time periods. In fact, there's lots, but the main geological time periods are recorded from those lines of latitude. But I consciously chose to work with the youngest, now generally accepted as a geological time period, the Anthropocene. When that starts is a moot point, but my choice was to find a piece of plastic rubbish as I found the stones, kind of by chance. I went locally to a local rubbish tip and just rummaged around with my hard hat and high vis on for the right shaped piece of plastic rubbish, and I've kind of found it. I had to waste some bits of lead in the bottom in its sort of nooks and crannies to make it heavier because it's quite light. Because sometimes on the table I'm on exposed drawing sites where the wind whistles across and the stones don't want to. They never did blow over, but they came close. Sometimes they wobbled. I was like, oh God, this is nuts. But so I needed to make the plastic heavier. So it's a piece of found plastic from a rubbish dump.
Do you know what it was in its previous?
Yeah, it had the labels on it. It was I could sort of see it was like a sort of a 5 litre can of probably chemicals or some sort of liquid, you know, sort of.
And just been crushed in the...
Yeah, just been crushed, you know, just been crushed in the rubbish tip. Then I worked hard trying to find a landfill site. I wanted to draw it in a landfill site, which obviously has a lot more rubbish underneath it. So speaking a little bit more about human waste and the capital city, I hadn't made a drawing in our capital city on these lines of latitude. So I chose a landfill site that was in London. It's on the southern edges in Croydon. And that took quite a long time to sort of find the right landfill site.
Again, because you need to be able to see the sunrise and
absolutely.
All those other kind of considerations.
Yes, practical considerations to make this drawing fit in sort of visual sort of linearity with the other 11, if you like.
Yeah. Oh. So the final work in the show, in a way, the sort of 13th kind of site, is in the barn, and it's on a completely different scale. It's very much human scale, relatable to in human forms, particularly as you come in through the door and you see this outline shape, which is vaguely sort of human shaped, and you see yourself reflected in that surface. And it's called Bearing Witness to Things Unseen. And I was thinking about the notion of bearing witness, you know, which has many different meanings, but you know, you're a witness to a crime scene, perhaps. And we're talking about the Anthropocene and what's happening to the planet. And I wonder to what extent there is a political with a small p agenda in the work.
Yeah, undoubtedly in the use of plastic, for sure. That was, I mean, that was a very conscious decision.
You're making a point.
Absolutely. And I made that point 3 times at dawn, noon and dusk, because on all of these drawings, I go to the effort, and it's quite some effort actually. It takes me to do an Instagram post.
Yes.
Because then that's a record of my thoughts of the day, and I think it's a lovely way of sort of generously opening up my sort of practice to an audience, whoever they are, wherever they are in the world. But also now it's really interesting looking back as a record of what I was sort of thinking, but it gave me the chance to think about expanded sort of notions of time because of how I wrote about it. So in actual fact, the whole you've got it there. So here's a book.
If you haven't seen the catalogue, there's reproductions of Simon's Instagram posts.
It's kind of part of the work, actually, the book, and the recording on Instagram posts, purposely an image of dawn, noon and dusk with text to go with, because then that sort of roots me. I can sort of cross sort of reference different time periods and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So come to the text, I haven't read it for a while, but come to the text of the plastic one, I definitely make a notion of how much sort of plastic waste, something like 170,000 tons of rubbish is dumped or was dumped in this landfill site from London alone, and it's now capped off, and it's become annually 170,000 tons annually. And it's now capped off. It's actually quite a nice nature reserve, or most of it's capped off. This is what they do with landfill sites. So yeah. Sorry, does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah, it's part of the work to bring our attention to the present situation. This is the view from this moment. You're looking back. You were talking right at the beginning about making drawings into the future. Maybe that 12th object is a kind of hinge or cusp between the past and the future.
Well, it is the now, isn't it? Geologically, but then the whole fascination I have with working with geology and that sort of deep time, reference our own sort of human time, is somehow striking a balance with that interconnectedness between rock and human, and deep time or celestial time as the earth revolves beneath my feet as I'm making these sort of drawings of the sun shadows, or indeed human time. So And I don't know what the answers are, but I guess one thing I'm trying to communicate, I don't know if that's too strong a way of putting it, but explore and interrogate is what's the nature of being, frankly, by a human being spending a day, or at least half of a day, the sunlight days, in the act of drawing a very simple geological material.
Amazing. And on that very big notion, perhaps we should finish the conversation and allow the audience to participate.
Very welcome.
Cool.
There's a lot of things I could say, so I'm not for the benefit of people. I mean, I'd like to ask and make observations, but actually let me, and it's to do with that and what you just said, but for me it's the nature of the performance of the process and your experience of it, and the fact that that is ostensibly very private, except even remote parts of the UK can be quite busy. So one question is the inevitable or the potential. What are you doing? How do you deal with that? But the other is, and forgive me if I got it wrong, that there's quite a bit of documentation. Was that part of the 11, or were they separate occasions? Because you weren't necessarily alone. There was a crew.
In the film
Yeah.
that we're exhibiting here, yes, this was, film crew of one. Because the poor man had to rise at 4 a.m. in the morning to sort of prep with me, to see me journey up the hill before the setup happened, and etc. On all of the posts I make, it's just me.
Yeah.
So this is why it can take about an hour and a half to write an Instagram post, because I'm drawing. There's no time to stop. I can stop for. Yeah. So I can take 5, 10, maybe 15 seconds to sort of physically stop drawing, quickly type a few words and carry on drawing, and then I'm sort of forming the next, perhaps what that sentence is, and maybe I do 2 lines and think, okay, or I might.
That is something then that's occupying your mind, isn't it?
It's kind of exhausting. I do continue to do it, those posts, but I don't quite know how I did it with these lines of parallels, because some of those posts are quite extensive, and I'm actually kind of confused how I did it. I think maybe just novelty.
Did you get much like what you're doing, or get off my land?
Very little. When people, I think maybe British people, are very polite or embarrassed by a strange man standing in nature, intensely looking at a stone. I mean, weirdo. So very, very few people actually come up to me. Half the time it's because I'm in lonely situations. Sometimes, so when people do come up to me, Essex farmer came up to me early in the morning. I don't know whether he'd seen me or been tipped off. He was bristling, and I had to work harder, just like sort of calm him down and be totally humble, and also apologetically say, I can't even look at you, sorry, but I'm focusing here. This is my task. I'm just a humble artist. I'm doing this. And he sort of calmed down. Then we had a chat, and it would have been nice if you'd asked me beforehand, and I couldn't because I had turned up late. Actually, I could have done, I suppose. But in actually, all truth be told, actually, I chose not to, because that was the site I had to make the drawing. And if he'd said, no way, I was stuffed. So I chose to chance it. And I'm reasonably polite and pretty inoffensive, so he calmed down fairly quickly. There was another occasion on latitude 55 in Dumfries and Galloway, top of this beautiful hill, and I could hear this quad bike come up from behind me, and I thought, oh God, this is going to be the farmer, and I haven't asked him, and there's sort of sheep in the field. It's a pretty bald field, actually. It's not lots of sheep, but he was definitely there to see, and I purposely pitched, not only was it the right location, but I had a choice of about, 20 square yards, but where I was just out of sight of his farmhouse. But somehow, farmers, they get around all over the place. They really have eyes in back of trees, He came up, and I was waiting to sort of be humble, and And actually, he was the nicest person, and he instantly got it, what I was doing, this durational aspect, watching the shadows move. We had the most fascinating conversation. I didn't have to explain to him, because he's under that sun every day, and he sees the moving shadows and this durational aspect. And that really sort of reaffirmed the universal in the drawings, actually, the fact that two strangers can meet and have a really nice chat whilst I was drawing on his land. It was a good thing. So.
I mean, you know, the question possibly rears something more about my own insecurities. And you know, you are a very sociable person, but yeah, in my own experience, that is often the case. You're really dreading it, but it's quite surprising how, you know, often, you know.
Well, I did. I did actually
expect to be, you know.
Well, it is an inch. I mean, you know, Shetland was lovely because it was just, I woke, I didn't see anyone. I went to the top of a hill, the most fantastic sight on the top of a hill on mainland Shetland. I went back to my car in the evening, didn't see anyone. It was just, and it was the end of that whole drawing odyssey. It was just a magical day. Partly because there were no people and the landscape was raw and magical. I was going to do a drawing this equinox on Glastonbury Tor, just behind us here, on Tuesday. And actually I was a bit sort of wasted from energy, so I didn't in the end, which was actually the right decision. And I will probably do one before the close of this show in 2 months' time. And part of the reason is not just the synchronicity of geographical location to the exhibition and a fantastic location on overlooking the Somerset levels where I get to see the rising and setting sun, but purposely, possibly perversely, choosing a very public site. And it's riddled with people up there on a very small footprint at the top of the Tor. And I know people are going to, they won't hold back, not the Glastonbury folk. You know, they'll be right into it. And I have no idea what will happen, but I think that'll be a really interesting journey to explore. Watch this space.
Do you feel flat after you've finished a project like this? I mean, where do you go? What do you have you already got something in your head of what you're going to do next? Or do you feel very, very flat afterwards and it takes a while to actually get going again?
Well, the project, for the project or a day's drawing, do you mean?
Well, the whole project, the whole thing. You've actually finished the project, have you? Or are you carrying on? Or are you going into Europe next door?
Well, you don't know, I don't quite know what's going to happen. So this exhibition is called Parallels, for obvious reasons, parallel lines on many levels. But it's part of the Parallel project.
No, I mean rather like when someone's trained for a marathon or an ultra marathon or something, and they do it and they feel very flat afterwards because they've actually done that, and then they start training again.
No, I mean it was 3 weeks of drawing, and then the process of, I didn't finish the sculptures for many months, and I've always got other things firing away in between. So actually, what happens is it fires up enthusiasm for the next project. I can feel flat on the day. I mean, intensely happy that I've pulled it off, but energetically drained for sure. But actually, I always sleep well that night after drawing.
One really weeny bit there. What paper do you use?
I use 300 gram Fabriano hot press Satinata, and I know I've answered this question a number of times. 300 grams because it's hard enough to sort of withstand being outside in nature. Hot press because it's got a smooth surface to draw on, and the particular size is because it helps. I've done smaller and larger drawings, but this one seems to work well as a finished object in a frame on your wall at home. But also it's I mean, physically it's really about my active engagement. I have to get quite close to sometimes where the tip of my pen is to see the differential between.
I do the same actually. I'm a pen and ink girl.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm down there.
So if it was a 4 foot wide sheet of paper, 5 foot wide, I wouldn't be able to get to the centre where the stone is. I probably could touch it, but I wouldn't be able to see. I mean, it might be interesting. I mean, I have done some quite large ones, but so there's certain reasons for.
Thank you.
Really?
Simon,
Freely, please.
So, I actually know that Simon climbs. He actually climbs, and I wondered, it might be interesting if you could tell us something about that, how you actually engage with climbing as an activity. practice? Or is it separated?
Well, on one level it's very separate. I mean, I suppose technically, I do borrow or use the understanding of how to pack kit well, or to limit weight, or to be prepared with clothing for all eventualities, how to navigate in certain places. Sometimes these walk-ins were in the mist in the morning, not particularly far, over huge hills. And sometimes recently I've been walking up hills in the mountain in Scotland. So there's the pull of raw nature there, which is actually really important for me, gratuitously, as a pleasure to make these drawings, and sites to make these drawings. There's the sort of a haptic quality about how I understand stone, the materiality of planet Earth, which is kind of really important, because really what I'm doing is drawing the very sort of sculptural qualities, these haptic qualities of the stone, which you can't really understand by sort of touching it or just looking at it. The drawings reveal something kind of unshown, really. So that notion of that's my sort of the tactile, the way I haptically sort of understand the world through climbing and working with stone as a sculptor and in these drawings, yeah, that sort of crosses over. There's something about the physical. I mean, climbing is for me is a great pleasure because of my body moving physically in space, and I do get a bit of a kick out about having a hard challenge, or like how early can I wake up, or can I go the distance? Midsummer's Day, it's going to be tough. Can I, you know?
Yeah, I was wondering whether kind of, not conceptually, but mentally, there's a similarity in terms of the approach. You know, that you've got to prepare, it's going to be a hard, potentially it's going to be tough, it's going to be challenging, you might not succeed.
Well, that's the definition of adventure in my books, is a journey with an unknown outcome. So I've absolutely no idea. Maybe a bird does a poop on the paper and it's like, oh, what's that, you know? Or the stone actually falls over, or I knock the table over. Yeah. I've almost done that a few times, because when it's windy I have to stake out guy lines. Yeah. And consciously, I'm focusing on here to consciously step over a guy rope all the time. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of times. And I have often kicked it and the stone's gone, I was like, whoa, that was close, you know. So there is a sort of a tension, which I get a kick out of, to be honest.
Sorry, but if I could...
The lady actually,
sorry. It's just a really simple question. Did you notice any difference in the quality of light in the different locations that changed your, did it alter your drawing? I don't, yes, but I don't think it was to do with the location, the geographical location. I think it was to do with either time of year or the ambient, you know, whether we've got sort of high pressure, low pressure, whether we've got rain. You know, rain literally takes particles of dust out of the air, so it's much more clear. That awful sultry day on latitude 51 in Cranbourne Chase, where I was kind of going a bit loopy, that was quite, it was that sort of hazy day. I mean, it was a beautiful sort of late summer's day. It's classically beautiful late summer's day, but very sort of intense and close. Not so much sort of close, sweaty close, but just emotionally very close. Couldn't really escape it. I love wind. Not so much that it blows anything around, but I do like feeling wind on my body. That's part of my sort of enjoyment, I think, of climbing, is that I feel something being resisted against my puny little body. You know, it's just flesh. You can rip it quite easily, tear it. I think that's one reason I kind of respect and like working with stone, is kind of this incredible opposite to my fleshy body, and its resistance to my sort of flesh, really. That's some sort of reason. But I think the atmospheric pressures and whether we got I mean, so actually long periods of sunlight. Again, going back to Dumfries and Galloway, latitude 55. That was a very, very clear day. We'd had endless sunshine days. The the sunrise was insanely red. It was just, so memorable that day, overlooking the Lake District. So I don't think the sites themselves, the 12th drawing in Croydon, because it was December, it was quite damp atmosphere. It was a beautifully sunny day, but a lot of sort of dampness. Most of that 24-hour day was dark and cold,
no sun. So the 8 hours of daylight I had, the atmosphere was very, very sort of damp, and the paper seriously ruckled in the morning. So that made the quality of the light slightly diffused, possibly. Actually, to be honest, it was in London as well, so there must have been some sort of, I mean, quite honestly, there must have been a lot of pollution in there. I hadn't thought of that, but that wouldn't have helped. But it was, the sun was fortunately strong enough to cast a shadow for me to trace.
So it's very interesting hearing your sort of narratives around, fascinating the experience of your day or the preparation. It struck me early on when you were talking that there's a parallel actually between your activity and maybe that of an early photographer. You can imagine people tramping up hills with loading plates on their back and taking all the processing materials. And so while you were talking, I was also thinking about a similarity between your activity of drawing, and then you're using the sun and the rock, but it reminded me of the camera obscura, and the idea of fixing, you're kind of fixing, that title, to fix an image in memory. It's a Vija Selman's piece, I think, to fix an image in memory. But that, there's something about your fixing of the intangible, movement, light, shadow through the drawn line, which I think is deeply related to photography and the history of photography. And I just wondered if you could say something about that, whether it was something that you think about.
Golly, I hadn't. You put that beautifully. I think that's really interesting, particularly the notion of a camera obscura. I'd never thought of that before, but actually the parallels are very, very strong, aren't they? Because camera obscura, lens obscura, reality obscura, I don't know, it's always shifting and changing, isn't it? It's reality, it's happening right in front of your face. You see the world turned upside down on a sheet of normally whitish material to capture the opposite of what's going on outside, reversed through a lens in a darkened room. I don't have a darkened room, but I'm absolutely capturing the reality of what's going on durationally. And the fact the camera, then the shadows and everything changes by the moment, throughout the minute. We notice it possibly every 5 minutes things change. Looking at a camera obscura, I notice it very dramatically every 2 minutes after I've drawn a line. My God, the Earth's rotated that much that there's now a 3 mil gap between the previous line. Oh, I must carry on and do another one. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about notions to, I'm thinking about Ansel Adams, taking his kit, and all sorts of photographers actually, into nature, often into wild places to record elements of nature. So I'm recording nature on that level, specific places, specific times, locations. That's very important. And particularly times, I wonder actually, you would probably be able to reverse engineer where I was on the planet if you knew what day I was, or at least you'd be able to reverse engineer what latitude I was on the planet. Because the lengths of the shadows, if you knew the height of the stone, you could work out, you could literally reverse engineer. It's kind of all maths. And there's something kind of interesting about that binary sort of analog way of engaging with the world, which I guess photography does. I don't know about digital photography, but certainly analog photography did and does. So yes, I mean there's a similarity there, but I hadn't really thought about that up to this point. Thank you.
When I first saw your drawings, I thought of the magnetic filings, when you did in school, putting a magnet under a piece of paper with filings on, and it looks very similar to that. I wonder if you thought about that as the Earth's magnetic field or anything like that.
I hadn't, but that's a lovely association, isn't it? What's interesting is that once you start thinking about these things, very simple. This is not a pictorial representation of the Earth, of the landscape. It's my representation of kind of almost like a scientific act of what has been sort of happening around me as I'm drawing. So science, or the understanding of nature and natural physical forces, once you see these patterns emerge on grand and small scales. So that, again, I hadn't thought of that. That's a lovely, lovely notion. And so we're familiar with at least diagrammatic illustrations of the magnetic fields running out of the poles of planet Earth and then being sucked back in. It's kind of all about planet Earth, really. Or really, aren't we lucky?
Well, unless anyone has any burning final questions, that feels like an appropriate moment to end. So I'm sure, as for your will, I'd just like to say thank you to both of you for such a, feel like I've been on quite a journey this evening. It's been great hearing from you both. So I think a round of applause is probably due.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Marvellous.
And I think that the lights should be imminently turning on if they're not already.
Tomorrow morning.